I believe it's now the stroke of 1 o'clock. Call the meeting to order. Roll call, please.
Commissioner Burke.
Here.
Commissioner Dunn.
Here.
Commissioner Art. Here. Commissioner Galmetti. Present. Commissioner Guardino. Commissioner Inman.
Here.
Commissioner Kehoe. Commissioner Medaffer.
Here.
Commissioner Tavalloni.
Here.
Chair Alvarado. We have a quorum.
All right, item number 2, welcome to the region, Stephanie Wiggins.
Good afternoon. Thank you, Vice Chair Inman and Commissioners, Undersecretary Annis, Director Branson, and Director Dougherty. On behalf of Metro and Caltrans District 7, we want to welcome you to the Los Angeles region. I have to share that I just got back from D.C., traveling to attend a legislative conference on transportation, and we have the best weather in the country. I just want you to know. And today is no different for that. So I'm just going to give you a brief state of the region, if you will. With the administration on my mind, I have to tell you, it's no secret that LA County, we're huge. We've got a population of 10 million. We cover over 5,000 square miles, and we continue to grow. We're also a major economic engine. Many of you may have traveled on the tour this morning over to the ports. You know, our complex at the San Pedro Bay ports is the largest in the nation, and together our airports and seaports handle over $400 billion in two-way trade. In November of last year, LA County residents made known their desire for a better transportation future. You know, they gave a resounding yes to Measure M, our new half-cent sales tax dedicated to transportation, with a no sunset provision. You know, support for our Measure M has demonstrated that commuters are willing to pay for travel options to help them avoid traffic, whether by car or by public transit, because Measure M addresses highways and streets, trains and buses, bicycles and pedestrians. And our plan is an ambitious one. We want to accelerate projects and expand the system to improve mobility for our residents and the goods that our transportation system carries. We plan to generate over 700,000 new jobs, generate over $133 billion in economic input, and that's just not Metro's number, that's our Los Angeles Economic Development Corporation's forecast. So to that end, we want to thank the CTC in particular for your efforts to date on the California Freight Investment Program draft guidelines. Your action today can provide a great opportunity for us to work together to address the significant challenges our goods movement system faces. We have achieved some great things together, the CTC, Caltrans District 7, and Metro. Just as a brief reminder, in your slide deck on slide 9, we jointly, with funding from the CTC, we helped develop the Orange Line, the first real bus rapid transit corridor in the country, with Prop 1B and TCRP funds. With CMIA and TCRP funds, we added 10 miles to one of the nation's busiest freeway, the I-405, through a new carpool lane. Together, we've launched 2 successful hot lanes, the first in LA County's history on our 110 and 10. And we have efforts underway to relieve congestion, working jointly with Caltrans District 7 on I-5 North. As many of you know, that could not be made possible without SHOP funding, Prop 1B funds, and STIP funds. And we're continuing to work together as we finally move forward on our commitment to our residents to complete a connection from LAX, the 3rd largest airport in the country, to our rail network. Again, we look forward to continue our partnership with the CTC, and we'll continue to support efforts to increase transportation funding statewide and to ensure that those dollars are strategically invested to improve mobility for all of us in LA County. Thank you.
Thank you, Stephanie. Any questions? And anybody want to know anything about a hot lane ever? Stephanie led that charge for us and did a great job, so congratulations on that too. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, item number 3, approval of minutes.
So moved. Second.
All in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Anybody abstaining? We're good. Item number 4, Commissioners' meetings for compensation.
I move we be compensated.
Very much.
ARP made the move, Dunn seconded. Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Anybody opposed? Anybody abstaining? All right. Our Executive Director report, Susan Branson.
Commissioners, as part of my report, I just wanted to remind everyone of our procedures that are on the front of our agendas. Just as a reminder that we would request any speakers to fill out the speaker cards and provide them to Doug, over here. And also, if there are any meeting materials that you have that you would like passed out to the commission, we do request that there be 25 copies provided and that they be provided to Doug at least 30 minutes before the commission meeting begins. And that way we are assured that we can get everything that we need out to the commissioners as well as the public. And then just as a reminder, we cannot accommodate personal equipment and videos and materials such as that. And all of that is on the front of the agenda. Just thought I'd use this as an opportunity, as a reminder. Commissioners, today I'm pleased to announce that the commission has made two new staff appointments. We have hired Curtis Vandermolen. And Curtis, would you please stand? Curtis was hired to serve as the Deputy Director for the Road Charge Pilot Program. He will be assisting the Commission in developing recommendations to the legislature. Curtis is a graduate from CSU Sacramento. He has degrees in political science and communications. He is also an alumni of the highly competitive Jesse M. Unruh Assembly Fellowship. Curtis has previously worked at lobbying firms. He's worked in the Senate and Assembly legislative offices. He has served in policy and process capacities as a consultant for Assembly members. He comes to the Commission with numerous years of experience or knowledge, I should say, in road charging. And he did start his first day with the Commission on Monday. So we're thankful to have him here. We also hired Justine Gutierrez. Justine, would you stand? Justine will serve the commission as staff in the position of our administrative officer, handling all the administrative aspects for the commission, and that will include interacting with all of you. Justine has worked for the state for more than 20 years. She has a strong background in budget and accounting. She quickly promoted when she was first hired with the state to a senior accounting officer. She has previously worked as a budget analyst for the Division of Maintenance for the last 5 years, and she also started her assignment working for the commission on Monday. So help me in welcoming these two outstanding individuals. And then with that, I've asked Garth to provide you an overview of the freight tour that was sponsored by Caltrans. It was held really to bring FHWA. I think there were representatives from Washington, D.C. to hear about freight. We had several commissioners that participated in that tour, and I've asked Garth to provide you with a couple of highlights from that.
Sure, thank you. Excuse me, Commissioners, during the first week of February, Caltrans organized a week-long statewide tour of key freight facilities, and really the primary purpose of the tour was to highlight the importance of the freight industry to the economies of both California and also to the nation. Representatives, like Susan was saying, from Federal Highway Administration and also several commissioners and staff from the commission attended, along with Caltrans. And some of the locations that were visited during this week-long tour were the Tijuana Otay Mesa Port of Entry, along with the Port of San Diego, and the Calexico Port of Entry facility in Imperial County. And we also received an overview of the key transportation constraints in both Riverside and San Bernardino counties, kind of a virtual tour there. And also we received a in-person tour of the BNSF intermodal facility in Ontario. We also had tours of the ports of LA, Long Beach, and Oakland. And also an overview by Caltrans of the I-80 Smart Corridor in the San Francisco Bay Area. We also received, had a tour of several CHP commercial vehicle inspection stations, and one of them being the Desert Hills facility, which is one of the busiest in the state. It's located in Riverside County. And when we were there, we were able to witness the long lines of trucks waiting to enter the facility for wait and inspection. And it's regularly backed up onto I-10, and it's the CHP staff did mention that it is kind of outdated, but it was an interesting overall statewide tour, and I think we really commend Caltrans and then also the regional partners that did pull it together. It was a really good opportunity.
Commissioners, I also wanted to share with you that Vice Chair Inman and myself attended the Ashe, Washington briefing on March 1st and 2nd in Washington, D.C., and I would expect Director Doherty may speak to this as well. But we had, the conference was wonderful. We had, we heard a lot from congressional leaders. We also, I think what I wanted to highlight in my remarks was U.S. Department of Transportation Secretary Elaine Chao spoke as a speaker, a luncheon speaker, and she really talked about that business as usual is no longer an option. It's time for rebuilding. She called for ensuring that the FAST Act is implemented in the most efficient manners possible, and that we remove any barriers that are potentially creating or holding us back from moving forward what we need to do. She, of course, with the president, talked about the need for private sector investment, but she also highlighted the need for a future of technology and, just wanting to really work with the State Department of Transportation agencies out there in removing barriers. And I thought, she really did a very nice job in her remarks. We also met with numerous congressional members as part of our time there. And we also met with the executive director for the Coalition for America's Gateways and Trade Corridors. We also met with staff to Senator Feinstein as well as Senator Harris. And I would just like to really extend my gratitude to Director Doherty and Giles Giovinazzi for just their welcoming to us, with all the other State Department of Transportation members there, and also for allowing us to attend a lot of your meetings. And just with that, I guess a couple other things. I do have an action item, a request, a change to the Commission's meeting calendar for May. The May Commission meeting right now is scheduled for May 17th and 18th. With your permission, Commissioners, I would like to use one of those days for a Self-Help County Town Hall meeting. The date certain for that meeting and a one-day commission meeting to be, authorizing staff to determine that day as the date gets closer to ensure that we have 8 commissioners present at our commission meeting. So with that change, Commissioners, I'd ask for your approval.
So moved.
Second.
We have a motion by Gometti, a second by Tavaloni. Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Anybody opposed? Anybody abstaining? All right.
And lastly, just would like to recommend 2 staff members who are here today. Actually, David is not here. David Van Dyken on our staff, as well as Eric Thronson. We have a report on unfunded investment priorities that you will be considering possibly later today or tomorrow for your approval to publish that report. There's a lot of work that went into it on the part of our staff, but I'd also like to recognize all the regional agencies and the CalCog, the Self-Help Counties, the League of California Cities, the California State Association of Counties, and others that assisted in that effort. We requested that report to be written in a very short time period, and everyone stepped up, and I just wanted to thank them all. So that concludes my report.
Thank you, Susan. Item number 6, Commissioner reports. Commissioner Dunn.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just a quick note that in my day job at the Orange County Business Council, we spent 2 days up in Sacramento in advocacy and met with a lot of both elected officials as well as administration folks, and it's quite clear they're all trying to work on some kind of an agreement on funding. So just wanted to let you know, everybody's working hard. No one is betting one way or the other, but they are sounding positive about it. So just wanted to share that with you.
Thank you. And then from my perspective, I'll add, I did enjoy participating in the ASHTO conference. I always love to hear what others are doing and learn, so I think it's great for all of us to be able to do that. I participated and spoke at the California Maritime Leadership Symposium, and clearly we're all in this together, and I think we realize that. On the freight tours, I too want to add my thank you to our Caltrans and our CTC and Federal Highways. I only did 3 of those days, but let me tell you, that was a long week, and it takes a lot of advanced planning. So if there was any doubt, the magnitude of what we all do together, if you did all of those tours, you had to be convinced of the huge importance of freight. So thank my fellow commissioners that were able to join. And then lastly, I got to participate in the press conference on the truck platooning pilot that we ran, and I actually got to be a part of a platoon, so it's pretty fun, exciting. Clearly, it's just a journey that we're all on, and all I can say is we have more acronyms coming, and I can't even remember. It's an advanced connectivity, help me out, Malcolm, whatever we call this, so Malcolm's going to cover that. Thank you. Any other commissioners? Hearing none? Okay, it looks to me like we might have Brian Annis here today to report from the Department of Transportation.
Well, good afternoon, Commissioners. Happy to report today on behalf of Brian Kelly. I wanted to start with really a thank you to all the Caltrans staff that have been working so hard over the past couple months. I think this is the wettest winter we've had on record, and it's done huge damage to our roads, as everyone knows. I think Malcolm might have some statistics on that. But, you know, thousands of Caltrans staff have been working out in the field and supported, of course, by partners in the contracting community and also people in support positions at Caltrans headquarters, district directors, headquarters, et cetera. And it's really extraordinary, I think, when you see the number of road failures that had to be fixed out there and how quickly Caltrans works. It's really when the skies are the darkest that Caltrans staff shine the most. So please pass on my thank you to staff and their excellent work out there. Wanted to also mention that we've had several communications from the state to the federal administration, and many of you are aware of these. The governor did send a letter through the National Governors Association that highlighted that the state has major infrastructure needs in many areas. It was not exclusively transportation, but also water projects, energy projects. The governor submitted a list of about 50 projects that are priorities for California. Wanted to thank many of the regions who worked with us to vet some of those projects. We feel we're able to, with your help, put together a fairly geographically balanced list of projects from around the state. And, you know, we're certainly hopeful that we've made the case that California has great needs and many excellent projects for additional federal infrastructure funds. And, you know, would certainly look forward to working with everyone in the room here as more detail on a federal program comes out, because clearly will likely be ongoing dialogue on different projects that might best qualify for whatever form the federal program might take. Also wanted to mention, somewhat related to that, President Trump had signed an executive order on environmental streamlining, inviting states to submit priority projects for that program. The state also submitted that list to the federal government, and that's a process where no federal requirements are waived, but there's a process the federal government to establish timelines, try to sequentially do work across different federal agencies so that the work is completed faster. Wanted to touch on state issues as well. Commissioner Dunn mentioned this as well, what's going on in Sacramento. Back in January, the governor met with the legislative leaders, and they sketched out a bit of a strategy here to have direct staff to work together. While we have 3 transportation proposals out there now from the governor and the 2 houses, we're instructed to have staff work together and see where the commonalities existed, really come up with a single plan. So we've been engaged in that almost on a daily basis the last several weeks. And I think the existing plans are fairly similar. You know, there's a priority on Fix It First for local roads and highways. There's a strong freight component in each plan. There's also transit funding in each plan. So there's a lot of similarities across these. So there's not, we're fairly confident here that we're building a single package and making good progress in that regard. So we hope that in the coming weeks, very soon, we'll have that single package to bring forward. That will not mean the work is done. Of course, the work then will be for all of the people that are interested in advocating for this to do that push to get the package passed. But again, the governor and the leaders have set a deadline of April 6th, which is approaching very, very quickly. So the work is going on daily. Lastly, I wanted to mention a somewhat related topic later in the agenda. The commission will be hearing from Caltrans on the 10-year shop and 5-year maintenance plan, which have been combined into a single report this year. We in the administration spent quite a bit of time looking at this report and trying to understand how it was supportive of our transportation funding package. We, of course, have specific targets we've laid out in the transportation funding package for pavement, for culverts, really those 4 key assets that the Commission has already adopted performance measures for, as well as part of asset management. So we did work with the department quite a bit on that report. I think it was released on Friday, but wanted to mention that if there's we think the work we did on that makes it a stronger report for consistency and so forth with that revenue package. So that the date of the release was somewhat influenced by the agency in going through this report with our other partners in the administration. So if that becomes a topic, just wanted to mention that to the Commission, that we did spend quite a bit of time with the department on that report and feel confident now it's a good, consistent document that ties very closely with our transportation revenue package. Thank you.
Thank you, Brian. Are there any questions for Brian? Hearing none, we'll move on to item number 8, Caltrans report. Malcolm Dougherty.
Thank you, Madam Vice Chair and Commissioners. First, let me welcome you to the Caltrans District 7 office building. This office building houses about 1,850 Caltrans employees. It also has a office for the City of Los Angeles Department of Transportation located here as well. It's a very interesting building, and there's actually a pamphlet that kind of delves into a little bit about its history and its architecture. But welcome to District 7. We're happy to host your meeting. I also have a couple of personnel announcements. I do want to share with the Commission and folks that we have appointed Mr. Matt Brady as the District 1 Director. Matt is somebody who's very familiar to District 1, very familiar to the department, has a tremendous amount of experience, served as the single focal point in District 1, as well as other management positions in District 1 and in headquarters. I think Matt is somebody that you have worked with before, and I'm glad to have him in that position, and I know that you'll be working with him going forward. I do want to take the opportunity to thank Tim Craggs, the Division Chief for Design, for filling in District 1 while we went through that process. And I'm always very happy to see folks step up and help us out in those times. I also want to announce that Chris Schmidt has been appointed to the Division Chief of Planning. He hails from District 11 in San Diego. He was one note of instrumental contribution that he had in his career was his work on the California Sustainable Freight Action Plan. So we welcome him to that position in Sacramento and look forward to working with him in that capacity. Again, the Division Chief for Planning. I will also mention the Washington, D.C. briefing. The DOT directors from around the country also had an opportunity to meet directly with Secretary Chow. She took the time to introduce herself to us each individually. And there's a lot of unknowns as far as the transportation investment package that is being discussed in Washington, D.C., and we're all watching very closely as to where any revenue would come for that investment. They are acknowledging the importance of investing in infrastructure and more specifically transportation, but I think that there's a debate going on about whether or not what that combination of private and public dollars are going to be in that investment. We met, as was pointed out by your executive director, met with some congressional representatives in the House as well as the Senate staffers. We targeted most of the individuals that serve on the Transportation and Infrastructure Committee. We did talk about the letters that Undersecretary Annis mentioned on infrastructure projects that was transmitted to Washington, D.C. For California, as well as the high priority projects for environmental streamlining. We also talked about the fast lane grants that are outstanding. I will elaborate on this for just one moment. The fast lane grants went out under the request call for projects, went out under the prior administration and had certain criteria attached to them. The new administration, I think, is going to look at projects with a different set of criteria, and they're evaluating whether or not they can grade that list of projects on their set of criteria or whether or not they have to redo that fast lane grant process. But we wanted to make sure all of our California representatives had our list of projects that was competing for fast lane grants in their hands. We also left behind a copy of our Caltrans 2-year plan, which is a subset of our 5-year strategic plan, so that they could see what our priorities were. And then we always took the opportunity, since it was a couple of weeks ago, to give them an update on storm damage and things that were going on in California. Just briefly on the storm damage, we have had approximately 386 damage sites. Of those damage sites, 267 required emergency contracts where we brought contractors on. And the total estimated damage of that damage is in the neighborhood of $730 million. There's an agenda item later on in your meeting to discuss exactly how we'll address those needs. Most of that work will be federally eligible, either as emergency opening or permanent restoration, and we are working with FHWA very closely. FHWA has already released $10 million of quick release money to address some of the costs that we've incurred so far. A lot of that work will spread out over several months and probably into next fiscal year. At one point, we had 44 road closures at one time. We are down to 13 road closures, and several of them are significant routes, specifically on Route 1, to name just one. And some of them will take months to restore. So we're working with local communities to try to catch up on that as best we possibly can and restore that access. I also had a chance last Friday to go up and visit Last Chance Grade up in District 1 on the North Coast, State Route 101. Significant amount of work going on to try to address historic slides that cover about a 3-mile stretch of 101. Met with District 1 staff as well as Senator McGuire, and also spoke to Congressman Huffman on the phone, and his staff was on that field trip as well. It is a historical challenge, but then this winter has also created some new challenges, and I just wanted to mention that. Undersecretary Annis already mentioned the 5-year plan and the 10-year SHOP plan, the draft 10-year SHOP plan. We'll talk about that later. That's captured and it's been released in the State Highway System Management Plan. And that plan also includes an update of the State Highway Needs Assessment as well as an investment plan. I will also comment on the truck platooning pilot. I had an opportunity to participate in that, and the trucks platooned on Interstate 110. That was a coordination between the Port of Los Angeles, Metro, UC Berkeley PATH program. And there were 3 trailers, and the specific reference to the technology is Cooperative Adaptive Cruise Control. It incorporates both connected and autonomous technology in each of those trucks. 2 last points. Our Chief Information Officer, our CIO, George Akiyama, was named California's CIO of the Year by California Public CIO Academy. So we're certainly proud of that. And on the old Bay Bridge East span, there is only one metal truss structure left. All the other ones have been removed, and the last one should be removed. It's scheduled to be removed on March 27th, and that is way ahead of schedule for the demolition of the aerial portion of that bridge. And then we hope to conduct all of the marine foundation implosions this year, and we were not scheduled to finish those until 2018, so that work continues to progress very nicely. So with that, I'd be more than happy to answer any questions. Thanks.
Fellow commissioners? Commissioner Dunn?
Not a question, Malcolm, but just a commendation. You know, I've reported in the past that South Orange County's toll road systems, I think, are probably the state's best example of a successful P3. The last segment, about 16 miles to connect the 241 to the 5, as a possibility, has been in litigation for 15 years, 5 lawsuits pending. A major settlement was reached last November among the environmental community, the AG's offices, a bunch of resource agencies, as well as the transportation corridor agencies. It's really an amazing, groundbreaking agreement. And a milestone was reached as well, thanks to Transportation Agency, Resources Agency, Caltrans, is the signing of a protective agreement on some cultural resources, wildlife habitat, surfing with trestles location. All of those really important resources have been protected further thanks to the recognition of both your department as well as the Resources Agency. So thank you, Malcolm, for that. I'm proud to say that this is a non-technical way of saying it, but I'm proud to say that non-technically, about a third of that last 16 miles is actually already started construction. And the last 2/3 is the hard stuff, but with Los Patrones already under grading, it looks like some good progress will be made. So thank you, sir. Appreciate your leadership in that.
Malcolm, I have a question for you. You mentioned, I think, $730 million of emergency repairs from the storm. Do you, or does anybody have a list of what the total storm street repairs would be? Because there's a lot of storm damage. I know Los Angeles, we've got a sinkhole in Studio City that I think a couple of cars landed in, and so I would guess that number of storm damage might easily be doubled if we counted our local storm damage. Does anybody compile a list?
I have not seen a compilation of the total storm damage to infrastructure, including transportation. The number that I shared with you is a running total of the value of the emergency contracts on the state highway system alone.
Well, it might be good, and I don't know who I would want to ask to do this, but I think when we're pitching that we need some help to have a holistic number, because some way or another through our precious transportation dollars, we have to figure out how to fix all this.
I will follow up with the California Office of Emergency Services. They typically will tally up damage from different events because they'll be looking for federal funding, and I'll see whether or not they have a compilation of the impacts.
Commissioner Dunn.
Well, thanks. To that point, I was going to raise it in the book item, but Malcolm, I'm also very curious on the storm events, on how many the districts that actually really didn't need very much money. And I'm wondering, just out of curiosity, is if a district, I'm looking at, if I recall the numbers correctly, I'm working off of memory, but like District 12 might have only needed about $1.5 million for repairs for those major events. Why was that so low? I mean, are there lessons to be learned here that because of things that OCTA did, Caltrans, TCA, were they all ahead of the game in preparing infrastructure so that it wasn't hit so bad? And I get rural areas are different, but what I'm trying to determine is, are there positive messages that we can use so that a Ventura might more likely pass a sales tax measure next go around because things were done in counties that had them that had less damage? Do you see what I'm saying? So I don't know if that's I kind of suggested it to Susan, maybe it's a WTS internship project to kind of analyze where the money was needed for repairs. But you probably have all
Well,
that anyway.
there's certainly a lot of variables about where you are geographically, whether you're right on the coast or in the mountains, as well as the age of the system. But I do think that there's a direct correlation to the amount of dollars being invested in the transportation
Yes.
system and how old the transportation system is.
Yes.
Orange County, as an example, has made significant investments in infrastructure, and it's a very young system comparatively. That's not unrelated.
Correct. But there are messages to be delivered here because our systems have to be sustainable, they have to live lifetimes, and investment clearly makes a difference. And so, sometimes I think the transportation systems are not very good at positive PR, and this would be a good, if there's the right messages to deliver, if there's lessons to be learned, let your business partners help echo that for you with the right information.
Sure.
Thanks.
Any other comments? Hearing none, we'll move on to item number 9, FHWA, the California Division, and doing the best Vince Mamano impersonation is Monica Gardine.
Thank you, Commissioners. As you see,
Vince is always missing on the hard question.
yeah, Vince had to go to a regional meeting. He's in Utah this week, so.
Yeah, sure.
Is that a basketball game?
No, good question. As was stated, Elaine Chao was confirmed as our U.S. Secretary back in January. Some of the focus points for the new administration includes improving safety, increasing infrastructure spending, and inspiring new innovations. Just this past week, Jeffrey Brusen was nominated as the DOT Deputy Secretary. I have no update on our administrator, but as was reminded, our last administrator wasn't nominated. Victor Mendez didn't come into office until July, and prior to that, Mary Peters didn't start until September. So hopefully we'll get some news on who our new administrator is before the end of the year. From a federal highway standpoint in the California Division, Paul Snyder came to the division office in February. He's our new Chief Operating Officer for the division. In the area of repurposing earmarks, we heard that there was some murmurings behind repurposing of earmarks. We're on track to get all of our earmarks hopefully repurposed by the end of this month, end of March. So if there are any projects in California that have an immediate deadline, just work with Caltrans and let us know, and we'll see if we can get that moved to the forefront. But for now, we hope to have all of our earmarks repurposed by the end of the month. And just to give you an order of magnitude, we had over 5,000 earmarks nationwide, totaling about $1.6 billion that were repurposed for earmarks for the agency. In regards to our performance measures, as you know, there was a hole in our performance measures, but as of March 21st, performance measure number 2, which is the bridge and pavement performance measure, should be issued, and performance measure number 3, dealing with system performance, should also be issued by March 21st. I believe that's all our updates for Federal Highway.
We have any questions?
Any questions?
Commissioner Gometti.
What's the status of our emergency requests? Do you know?
We had a quick release fund when we released
That
$10
was
million.
$10 million, but I think we've got a lot more.
So what usually happens is after the governor declares a state of emergency and names the counties, we then submit to FHWA in writing which events would qualify for emergencies. We've done that. They've responded in the affirmative. So now it would be, they're approved for, those events are approved, and now it would be a reimbursement as we submit bills and get confirmation on each of the different impacted areas as to whether or not it's emergency opening or permanent restoration. So now it's just a matter of reimbursement. We're going through the eligibility process as it comes up.
All right, once we get the DDIRs, the damage assessment reports, when you submit them, we'll reimburse that.
So our reimbursements have been approved?
Well, as we go through, we're getting them approved as far as whether or not they would be emergency opening or permanent restoration. The dilemma is USDOT and FHWA only has a certain amount of money set aside each year, and when they run out of that money, it rolls over to the subsequent year. We may be waiting 6 or 7 years to get some of this reimbursement. What we may have to visit with FHWA is doing a special appropriation to catch up on emergencies, because we're going to suck up the emergency reserve of them for 6 or 7 years with this 1 year. But we haven't submitted those bills yet. Once we get those bills submitted to FHWA, we'll work with our congressional delegation to try to get that to happen.
Thank you.
So I have a question in that regard. So if the governor declares an emergency, and we have local partners as well as Caltrans partners that have projects that are eligible to be reimbursed. So is there one clearinghouse, or all our different agency partners turn in their own separate requests?
Yes, typically what happens is each agency turns in what they call a damage assessment report to Caltrans, and then Caltrans submits the bill to Federal Highway, and then we
It
reimburse
does come
it.
through us.
So then you would get the local requests as well?
Yes, if it's eligible, yes, we would get it.
Okay, so you'll know, the $730 million is just what Caltrans has executed, those contracts, right?
Correct, and the only ones we would see from the locals is the ones that they're submitting for eligibility for federal reimbursement. So we wouldn't see all the others, but we would see that batch. It would come through us, and we would work with FHWA, help facilitate it.
Well, it just seems to me that the number's probably a lot larger.
Oh, yeah.
And holistically, our system of systems, we all need to, so we might want to be,
We can work with Caltrans and try to get that number for you.
yeah, that'd be good.
And that would only be on the road side. That would not be necessarily on the rail side. There was impacts to certain rail lines, because that would be another federal agency that would go through.
Well, I mean, if we're just pitching our spiel that we need some help here, it's nice to have the whole picture and be able to, talk in the holistic scenario there, so.
This is just transportation. We also have the Oroville.
Well, I know, yeah. Maybe that's a number we don't even know. Commissioner Burke?
Well, my only experience was the major earthquake, and there was a lot of cooperation between city and county and the state. And as a result, it was possible to move some of the projects very, very fast, and waivers of a lot of the state requirements. And I know that's how the 10 was repaired very fast, as well as, of course, state facilities like the Coliseum at that time was a state facility.
Do we have any other?
It was incredible.
Any other comments? Okay, thank you, Monica.
Thank you.
Moving along, item number 10, our regional agencies moderator, Kenneth Cow.
Thank you. Thank you. Good afternoon, Commissioners. As you might have noticed, I regret to inform you that I am not Melissa Garza from Fresno. I'm Kenneth Cow with MTC. Melissa unfortunately had to resign her post, and we all want to thank her for her duty in serving as regional moderator, and I volunteered to serve out the rest of her term to June. So the regional agencies met earlier today, and we discussed a number of items. First, we talked a little bit about the 2018 STIP fund estimate draft assumptions. I know the commissioners are always very interested to see what the regions are doing to help inform the legislature to see if we can have a fix. And to that end, a subset of the regional agencies put together a fact sheet, STIP fact sheet, that kind of describes what the STIP is and what we think would be helpful for the STIP in terms of increasing the price-based excise tax. And we shared that fact sheet with the Senate Transportation Committee back in February 14th. And we'll be happy to share that with your staff. We already have, and we'll have them also share it with you so you can have a look at what we've done there. We've also been meeting, of course, with our own legislators to inform them of the importance of SB1, AB1, and the various other proposals to increase the price-based excise tax, as well as to provide a more stable funding source for transportation in the state. Also, the RTPAs will be working with CTC staff over the next few months to look at the 2018 STIP guidelines as they will be developed over the next few months. And we would like to help with that development and give them some of our comments earlier in the process. Another very big topic is the California Freight Investment Program, or CFIP. First, I would like to thank staff very much for being very open and listening to our comments. It's a very compressed schedule, and we're very happy to see that a number of our comments were considered and made it into the revised draft, including the extension of the award deadline to 2022. The majority of our other comments were related to the funding side. So there was a 40% proposed for the state, and most of the regions believe that a number closer to the 25% set aside in the State Transportation Improvement Program might be better aligned with many regional and state priorities, since they are very closely aligned in a number of areas. We would also like to discuss a little bit about the corridor splits. The commission staff used the 2014 plan, I think the freight plan, and since then there have been a number of agencies and regions that have adopted newer goods movement plans and other plans that have the most up-to-date projects and numbers. So we would like to see the commission consider those plans as a way to split the funding among the remaining corridors. And finally, we would like to see a potential delay in the adoption of the CFIP. Right now you have August, at your August meeting, to adopt the program, and in order for us to do a full transparent process and outreach and ensure that all of our stakeholders are involved, we would like to potentially look at a September adoption. I understand the commission has a town hall meeting scheduled in September, and so I would encourage the commission to examine that as a possibility. And then next, on the active transportation program, again, we would like to thank commission staff. The large MPO portion should be adopted today or tomorrow for most of the MPOs. We are looking forward to cycle 4 and know that there will be a number of workshops to look at the potential guideline changes. And to that end, the RTPAs have been thinking about proposed measures and suggestions to improve ATP delivery and to avoid extensions in the future. So we will definitely be working with your staff very closely. With that, I'd like to wrap up and happy to answer any questions.
Do you have any questions or comments? Hearing none. Thank you, Kenneth. Okay, moving along. Item number 11, Rural Counties Task Force. Mora?
Good afternoon, Commissioners. Mora Toomey, Chair of the Rural Counties Task Force. The Rural Counties met on March 10th and discussed the following issues and concerns. Regarding the California Freight Investment Program, the Rural Counties appreciate that the Commission included a funding target for projects not in designated corridors, providing rural agencies an opportunity to compete for freight funding. In addition, we support the reduction of match to 30%, allowing more agencies the opportunity to compete. We do request, however, that the Commission delay the adoption of the program to the fall, providing the regions more time to develop and review applications through a thorough and transparent process. That concludes my report. I'll be happy to answer any questions.
Any questions? Hearing none. Thank you, Mora. Self-help counties, Sarkis.
Thank you, Madam Vice Chair and Commissioners. Sarkis Kachek with the Santa Barbara County Association of Governments here to provide the Self-Help Counties update. I have 4 items to brief you on. The first one is related to Assembly Bill 28. We do have some promising news on getting this legislation adopted. As you know, Self-Help Counties is the sponsor of this bill, which is Assemblyman Frazier's urgency legislation to extend NEPA delegation. We are pleased to report that AB 28 was voted out of the Senate Appropriations Committee last Monday, which makes us eligible to be on the Senate floor tomorrow. We have requested transferal to the Assembly for a concurrent vote on the item, and we will also request immediate enrollment and transmittal to Governor Brown's office by March 21st, which will help us meet the March 31st deadline. The second item is related to the I apologize. Federal Aviation Administration tax issue. We are still pursuing this issue and have been meeting with the Governor's Office, Department of Finance, the agency, as well as congressional staff on identifying potential solutions to this matter, and we will keep you updated at future meetings. The third item is related to the transportation funding proposals. Self-Help Counties Coalition continues to support the transportation package at the state level. I think everyone, I'm preaching to the choir here, but we're trying to provide any support that we can to ensure that a package is approved by the state. And finally, as Director Branson noted earlier in her report, we really value our partnership with the California Transportation Commission, and we look forward to working with you on the development of the town hall, which will be held in May. And so we've already started the planning process for that, and we're open to any other ideas or suggestions that you may have. And so we look forward to meeting with you in May. And that was my fourth and final item, and I'll conclude my update and take any questions.
Do we have any questions? Hearing none, thank you, Sarkis.
Thank you.
Okay, moving along, item number 13, Greenport Gateway Rail Project. Garth?
Yes, Commissioners, fortunate to have Allison Yo from, who's the Director of Transportation Planning at the Port of Long Beach. And tab 13 here is an informational item. But she's going to be providing an overview of the Greenport Gateway Rail Project, and this $93.4 million project increased rail accessibility to the port with a resulting reduction in truck trips. And with that, Allison?
Thank you. Good afternoon, Commissioners. I'm Allison Yo, Director of Transportation Planning for the Port of Long Beach, and it is my honor to be here today to give you an update on the completion of our Greenport Gateway Rail Project at the Port of Long Beach. If this project sounds familiar to you, it should. This is a partnership project between USDOT's Maritime Administration, and I believe we have a representative, our Southern California Gateway Director, here in the meeting as well, the State of California and the Port of Long Beach. The project totaled almost $93.5 million and included two components. It included the PRF support yard, affectionately known as TCIF Project 24, and the Ocean Boulevard track realignment, which is also known as TCIF Project number 25. The project realigned some existing railroad tracks and added new tracks in order to free up some bottlenecks and pinch points in the system where rail traffic had been congested. This is important to the port's mission and to the region and also to the nation because these improvements reduced train delays and also reduced air pollution by reducing idling time, locomotive engine idling times. The project is a component of the port's goal of moving cargo by rail as we anticipate growth in cargo demand. The goal is to displace truck trips, and we estimate that one fully loaded double-stack train, as you see in the photo here, removes about 750 trucks from regional roadways. We estimate that between 2015 and 2035, the project is estimated to eliminate nearly 2.3 million truck trips, and this translates to reduced greenhouse gas emissions by over 300,000 metric tons and reduces criteria pollutants by almost 550 tons. And we've seen that the project is meeting some of its initial goals. The average on-dock rail use at the Port of Long Beach for the first year post-construction of this project had increased from 18.3% to 26%. There's some familiar faces in this slide. The project reached substantial completion in March 2015. And as I mentioned before, it is a product of a funding partnership between USDOT, Maritime Administration, the State of California, and the Port of Long Beach, and was supported by $17 million in Tiger 3 funds $23.1 million from the state's Prop 1B Transportation Measure TCIF program, and the port's $53.3 million contribution. So partnerships like this assist the port to make our infrastructure investments needed to facilitate more efficient operations, support our environmental and air quality goals, and serve in meeting the nation's needs in moving cargo. So while we continue to monitor and evaluate the air quality and efficiency benefits over time, we've already earned some early recognitions from industry. We believe that these awards are possible because of these particular funding partnerships and collaborations, and so we share the following plaques and awards. And at this time, if it's okay, I'd like to ask Eric Shen, our Southern California Gateways Director, also because I have a set of plaques for presentation to him as well. First, American Planning Association's Los Angeles chapter awarded us with the 2016 Implementation Award for Large Jurisdiction. The American Society of Civil Engineers, the Metro LA chapter, first identified us for receiving the 2016 Outstanding Construction Project, and later on awarded us with the 2016 Outstanding Airports and Port Project, which was a competition across the state of California. And the American Public Works Association of Southern California recognized this project for its traffic mobility and beautification efforts. So thank you again, and I look forward to continuing to work together in collaboration on projects like these. And I have 2 of the 4 plaques. Some of these are so new, the other 2 haven't arrived yet, and I don't know if I should pass them around or hand them over this way, but we have one from the American Planning Association, and then the other one from the American Society for Civil Engineering. Thank you.
Did money come with those awards? Okay, Allison, thank you again for organizing the tour this morning. We appreciate the tour, and so thank you all for your great work down there. Item number 14, State and Legislative Matters. Eric.
Thank you, Commissioners. So this is an action item, as it is every meeting, and we will be asking you guys to take some action, excuse me, specifically two specific actions. First, staff will be asking that you adopt support positions on bills that are implementing the Commission's recommendations. And second, that staff asks that you approve submitting a letter to Assemblymember Ting discussing the Commission's concerns related to AB 857, a bill of his that he has introduced. So first, the bills that are implementing the Commission's recommendations included in the annual report. There are 3 bills that the Commission has not taken a support position on yet that are directly implementing Commission recommendations. They are AB 278, a Steinorth bill that includes exempting from CEQA projects, essentially projects in the right-of-way with certain exceptions. It's the same bill as Mr. Steinorth introduced last year, trying to implement a Commission recommendation. And it is also similar to language that is in the funding proposals of both the legislature and the governor. AB 515, a Fraser bill, requires Caltrans to prepare a state highway system management plan, essentially to combine the 10-year SHOP plan and the 5-year maintenance plan into one document, because it does make sense for those documents to be taken together, because they are in all trying to manage the assets of the state. And that is also a recommendation from the Commission. And then finally, AB 1282 is Assemblymember Mullen bill that establishes a transportation permitting task force consisting of representatives of both transportation entities such as agency, Caltrans, and the Commission, as well as resource agency individuals, representatives, to really develop a process for early engagement and improve transportation permitting processes in the state. So those 3 bills, implementing Commission recommendations, staff is asking that you take a support position on all those bills so that we can go and testify in support of those bills at committee hearings and provide letters of support to the committees and those types of things. Finally, the other thing that staff is asking you to take a look at is AB 857 is a Ting bill, Assemblymember Ting from San Francisco. This bill is conceptually very similar to a bill that he ran last year that was held in Senate Appropriations. It essentially allows Caltrans to lease airspace to the city of San Francisco for park, recreational, and open space purposes. Right now, it is still a draft form, essentially, of the bill, and I understand from their office that they are planning to substantially amend it. In the past, last year, the commission took an opposed position on this bill based on concerns about, concerns about the precedent that it sets to give away, to essentially give away or long-term lease property that was purchased with state transportation funds for the purpose of a local jurisdiction, for the benefit of a local jurisdiction. Our understanding is that the office is wanting to work hard to try to address some of these. So at this point, staff is just recommending that we send a letter to the assembly member describing our concerns and working with the office to try to address some of those concerns. And then after amendments have been taken and it looks, we can take another look at whether or not the commission wants to have a formal position on the bill or not before it goes further forward. So with that, if there's any questions about those bills or any bills that are in your packet or that you've heard about, I can do what I can for those. But I just need a motion to do the staff recommendations, and then I can send these letters and whatnot that you guys would like us to do.
Okay, Eric, I think we have some questions. So Commissioner Madaffer first, and then Gilmetti.
Thank you, Chair Inman. Yeah, so my first question, Eric, I'm a little confused. You were saying support, you want a motion of support, but yet I see 3 bills that you want us to monitor.
Right, well, so there's a section.
The letter on the Ting bill.
Right, so there's a section of the book item that talks about bills implementing commission recommendations. And those 3 bills are the bills that where staff is proposing that we take a support position on because they are directly implementing recommendations out of the commission's annual report. And then there's other bills of interest to the commission, which have 3 bills mentioned. I only talked about one of them because it is the one that has an action. But the other 2 are AB 174, the Bigelow bill, and AB 179, Assemblymember Cervantes bill. And those bills relate to commission composition. And at this time, staff is not recommending that the commission take positions on those bills as they are, related to what the legislature may or may not want the commission to become, and that is.
I appreciate that. I just wanted to make sure I understood because the format of the report shows 278, 515, and 1282 under support, and then these other bills, 179 and 174, you've got in there as monitor. So I just wanted to make sure that. So 278, 515, and 1282. Motion for support, motion to monitor 174 and 179, and then the letter on AB 857 expressing concern.
Exactly. Yes, sir.
That's my motion.
Commissioner Gilmetti.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I guess it was Monday, Executive Director Branson and myself met with the City and County of San Francisco on Ting's AB 857. To do what they want to do would cause the state to lose an annual amount of money, significant. And I think what Executive Director Branson suggested, and I support, and we told them and their author to see if there's a way to make up for that. We have to spend a great deal of money on mitigation throughout the state for new projects and redoing projects, et cetera. So we asked them to consider putting in their legislation the idea that we would get mitigation credit for the amount of money that we're basically giving up in order for them to build parks, et cetera, in the city of San Francisco. And I'm hopeful that they include that in their legislation. And if they do, I think, we might be able to, at least this commissioner might be able to support that bill. The second one I wanted to address was another one of Ting's bill, and Commissioner Gardino's not here to help me support this, but this has to do with riding your bicycle to a stop sign and not having to come to a full stop, so that if the coast is clear, you can coast through the stop sign. And at some point in time, I'd like to see the commission support that bill.
To not go through, to be able
To
to ride
support
through
it.
a stop sign?
That you don't have to stop at the stop sign?
If you look both ways and there's nothing coming, you don't have to come to a full.
But, you know,
It's a yield sign first.
Yeah, it's basically a yield.
Pretty much what it is today, anyway.
Yikes.
except,
Decriminalizing behavior.
Madam Chair, I live
Commissioner
on a
Brooks.
street where there are stop signs and it's heavy bicycle use. And there have been severe accidents. I'm sure they're looking, but if you're going very fast and this is a hill, they can't see. And as a result, if there's a car coming out, that's it. They're destroyed.
That's under existing law right now, and that's a problem.
That's right. And
You
so,
have
I
to
mean, so
yield.
what we're going to say is they don't have to stop, right? That they can just look and then go. But if it's a blind corner, you can't see.
Right now, this is called a yield.
Yeah, well, I really have a problem with it.
Well, Commissioner, staff will take a look at that bill, and we will bring it back to you at the May meeting for consideration. How about that?
Commissioner
Thank you.
Dunn?
And sometimes we have police officers who stop there and stop each one who runs, too.
I think of that bill as the Darwin effect. Eric, is it my imagination, or do we have a lot more transportation bills than in recent memory before us?
I know.
Well,
Or
we
are you just that really good that you're finding them all?
we threw out a wide net.
Okay.
Especially for this list. A good third of this list, maybe half of this list are spot bill, are bills stating legislative intent to do something related to transportation that aren't actually able to move at this point, but we have to keep an eye on them because presumably they were introduced for some purpose. And so at some point very soon, by the May meeting, a lot of those spot bills won't be on the list anymore because they will have not moved. So it looks like a long list now. I think it will narrow significantly over the next.
Well, it's just that the number appears to be inversely proportional to the amount of congestion relief enjoyed by Californians. So I just want you to keep an eye on the fact that this seems much bigger than we've ever seen.
Well, I would like to might suggest that the commission has spent a lot of time informing legislative staff over the last 18 months or so on transportation issues, and that that may be also increasing the interest of legislators on transportation bills, transportation-related bills. You never know. There may be some correlation to that as well.
Thank you.
There's also a long bill list, just generally speaking, too.
Well,
So,
yeah. We've never seen it.
Commissioner Arp?
I have a recommendation on that bicycle one. If you might amend it so that if you're wearing those little clip-ons with the egg beater pedals, because when I was riding my bike and came to a stop sign, I couldn't unclip my pedals and I fell down. And I was laying on the ground like a turtle with, and the cars would drive up to the stop sign and look down at me and then they'd drive off. They didn't have any sympathy for my situation. So I have taken those off my bicycle. I got several more for Christmas that have not been opened if anybody's interested.
Another bill opportunity.
That might be under the TMI category. Okay, do we have any other comments? Commissioner Madaffer?
Yeah, why don't I go ahead and separate my motion then to two different motions. And so the first motion would be to adopt staff recommendations as item 1 and 2 in the agenda, which would be to accept the staff report on legislation of interest in attachment A and adopt positions of support on the bills implementing commission recommendations. So that'd be the first motion.
Do we have a second? The motion was by Madaffer, second by Tavaloni. Any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Anybody opposed?
So the
Anybody
second-
abstaining?
The second motion would be then to adopt the draft letter set forth in Attachment B for transmittal to Assemblymember Ting, discussing the Commission's concerns with Assembly Bill 857.
Second.
Motion by Madaffer, a second by Commissioner Dunn. Any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Anybody opposed? Anybody abstaining? Thank you. Motion carries.
That should probably apply to all of them.
Is that the end of your motions? Must be. Okay. The monitors, we're just going to monitor.
Yes.
Okay. We're going to move on now. Does that complete, Eric? Are you finished?
That does complete
Okay.
this item.
Okay, we'll watch that long list of transportation-related bills. So I guess we're excited that at least we're having people paying some attention to our issues.
Too creative.
Item 15, budget and allocation capacity update. Mitch?
Commissioners, this is an information item. Clark Paulson will be presenting this item for Caltrans, but before he begins, I would like to note this item contains a recommendation related to the Aeronautics Acquisition and Development Program. Because this is an information item, the Commission can take no action. Further, it's not a recommendation which staff has received enough information to support. Last year, you may recall, the Commission approved a $4 million transfer from the local airport loan account to the aeronautics account. This transfer was not approved by the Department of Finance. Therefore, Caltrans is recommending the Commission defer allocations for projects in the Aeronautics Acquisition and Development Program. Staff believes program projects should be delivered by the implementing agency and brought forward to the Commission for allocation. The Commission can then weigh the risks of making an allocation, or rather than making allocation, placing the projects on a deliver but not allocated list. With that, Mr. Paulson will give his presentation.
Thank you. Clark Paulson. I'm filling in again for Mr. Keck, as the Chief of Division of Budgets. And I'd like to invoke the Fifth Amendment about what I do on a bike when I reach a stop sign. I want to get in trouble. So the presentation about allocation capacity, as of the end of the last CTC meeting, in January, we had achieved 50% of allocation capacity. You had taken actions to allocate to that level. And just as a comparison to the similar time last year, we were at 38%. So we have reached a greater degree of delivery at this point through the current year. I also wanted to highlight for the SHOP program, we've achieved 56% delivery. For the STIP program, meager as it may be, we've achieved 72% delivery at this point. And I also just wanted to comment a little bit on the Transit Intercity Rail Capital Program is reliant on cap and trade auction proceeds. You may have read or heard that the proceeds from the last auction were less than meager in terms of the proceeds. They were $8 million out of a total capacity potential of $600 million. I just mentioned that because it does impact the available resources for that particular program and will limit the size of allocations that are available. So in February, the Board of Equalization met as required by law to consider the price-based excise tax level that will take effect on July 1st of this year and carry for the next fiscal year. They adopted a rate of 11.7 cents, which is the first time the rate has gone up in a number of years, which is a good thing. It's not an astronomical raise by any means. But it, in a measure of a positive note, it tracks very closely to the last fund estimate that you as the Commission adopted. We assumed 12 cents for that 17-18 in the last fund estimate, and so 11.7 cents is very close to that, and will essentially provide for the allocation capacity that you assumed in the last fund estimate. That will provide about $1.7 billion in revenue from the price-based excise tax revenue next year, and that's about $260 million more than the current year. Also, the Board of Equalization took action to maintain the current diesel fuel excise tax rate of 16 cents at their meeting. So here's a picture I think we've reviewed in the past as it relates to the whole funding available through this tax and what's available for the programs that you allocate. And on my left, on your right perhaps, the 16-17 rate produced about 25% of those revenues for the programs that are allocated. That'll go up to about 35% next year in 17-18. Far from our peak in terms of the highest rates, but it does provide more funding next year for STIP, SHOP, and local streets and roads. And then just a comment on things that are coming up. Caltrans will release the transportation financing package in Chart C at the beginning of April. Mr. Annis already mentioned the April 6th target that the governor and legislative leaders have set in terms of financing or a funding package. In May, we will have the budget process we refer to as the May revision, which will update the budgetary proposals that the governor makes to the legislature. We will have the final proposal at your May meeting for the fund estimate assumptions, and then of course in June the Budget Act is due. That concludes this presentation. If you have any questions, I'd be glad to respond.
Commissioner Arp?
Yes, Clark, thank you for that presentation. I do have one question. When we have I'm not real sure how the process works between, what the connection is between our calculations for allocation versus capacity and in cash flow. Like when you have a year like we have this year where there's just a lot of money going to be spent on road repair that wasn't necessarily part of these projections a couple years ago. How does that work?
Sure. So as we develop our allocation capacity, we take into account the cash balances that are available in the transportation funds. We also set a floor, if you will, below which we try not to dip in terms of our cash balances, just to make sure that we're able to meet our operating needs for cash. In the case of the current situation with the emergency demands on our program, we've evaluated the cash balances just to ensure that we wouldn't be broaching any unsustainable activity. We don't have an issue right now. We have a cushion in terms of cash balances, and we don't foresee any issue with meeting the needs of emergency relief and other departmental operations. So that's something, in short, we're watching all the time, just to ensure that we take any actions we need to if there's any strain on our cash balance.
Well, I remember a few years ago when there was a lot of budget, when we were in those years of no budgets getting agreed on, and I know that it seemed the treasurer has some kind of an account. Isn't there an account that there's money that's sort of moved in and out of the general fund? Sometimes they borrow from your money to take care of a general fund need, but it's always these short-term loans, and then they pay the money back. Is that part of this whole thing? Is that there's always kind of you've got other money that you can kind of move to on short-term basis if you need it, or how does that work?
So in the past, the treasurer did often take advantage of the short-term loan process to meet general state cash flow demands. That hasn't been the case any time in recent pattern. They haven't had to rely on state highway account funds to meet general state cash.
Oh, so that was basically a one-way deal. If they needed money, they would come and get it, but we don't get to go to the general fund for short-term needs.
We never took advantage of such an opportunity.
Director Doherty?
Yeah, just to add that Clark discussed the cash flow balance better than I ever could, but one of the other implications that the commission may be interested in is the implications on projects. We set aside a certain amount of money for emergency response at the beginning of each year. This year it was approximately $150 million. The last 5 years we probably didn't even use that. This year is an anomaly. So when we blow past that, at the end of the year we may have a lot of project savings from bids. We would normally apply that to new projects. We won't have that opportunity this year. And as may be discussed later on, at the end of the year, we may have to move projects that were going to be allocated in June to July to be able to cover these funds until we get reimbursed. So there's a little bit, cash flow is certainly one implication, but the other is the impact on the shop and the capacity in the shop. So we may have to move some projects the following year.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Commissioner Gometti?
Thanks, Chair. Mike, I go way back on this where we were asking contractors to take IOUs, basically. They were funding projects for us. And going back to the comment that I made earlier about the Fed reimbursement, I'm concerned that we will run into, we are out of funds to begin with. I'm really concerned that this thing might dribble down to where we're going to ask the contractors to fund us.
It's definitely a concern to us about the reimbursed time frame. I don't think we'll ever find ourselves in that position for this task. I think the best strategy for us is once we have the bills starting to tabulate, go to Congress and have them make an additional appropriation to cover those emergency projects nationwide and catch up on all the commitments that the federal government has. And I think that that's our best play. And then that means that the reimbursement will be much more immediate.
Tell them it's not from California.
We have any other comments? I guess Commissioner Dunn?
Sure. Can you share why cap and trade funds are down?
So this probably requires someone a little smarter than me, but I've listened to smarter people. And so the understanding that I have is in some cases, those who are buying the auction credits were doing so somewhat in a speculative fashion. So they were pooling them for potential resale. And because there are court challenges to the program, as well as a sunset date of 2020, those who may have been engaging in that activity no longer see it as a lucrative investment, if you will. And so they've been very reluctant to buy the credits on the potential that a judge could rule the program illegal, or that it comes to a sunset and their investment wouldn't pay off. And so that's my understanding from listening to those who are familiar with that concept. Aha, here's one of those smarter people.
Oh, well, I don't know if that's true, but I was just going to add on to what you said, that one of the aspects of the market is that before the state credits are sold, there's a series of credits sold by the utilities. If you notice on your utility bill every few months, I see on mine there's a rebate that comes through the cap and trade program. So some of the expenses the utilities incur pass on to the ratepayers, or then come back to the ratepayers through this rebate of cap and trade. So there's a bit of a sequence in how the auctions are administered. There's first the utilities selling the credits. There is a secondary market where other, from prior auctions, credits can be resold. So the auction's still working, selling large numbers of credits, but in recent times, the credits available in the secondary market and through the utility auctions have pretty much met the demand. And as Clark mentioned, that one issue appears to be this sunset date, or this at least perceived sunset date of 2020, and the governor's budget does propose to, in statute, clarify that authority as an ongoing authority. And there's some thought with that the market would see more robust auction results, auction revenues, as the auctions had done until about a year ago.
Thank you.
Clark, I have one question on the increase in the gasoline, but yet diesel remains unchanged. Is that just because of this creative calculations we go through? I mean,
correct. So the Board of Equalization is tasked essentially with ensuring that there's revenue neutrality based on what the price of the gas and the diesel are. And so the price-based excise tax is theoretically mirroring what sales tax would have been had sales tax still been in place as it had been previously. And so there's they do the math essentially to determine what the tax rate would have been, and they set the price-based excise tax rate to match that. And so as they analyzed the diesel fuel level, or diesel fuel sales and price, they determined that there was still revenue neutrality at the current rate.
So does that imply less volatility then in the pricing on diesel, perhaps?
I think that, as well as compared to gas, diesel is relatively small in terms of consumption in the state. And so it isn't as volatile because of lower volumes.
Okay. Any other questions? Mitch, did you want to add something?
Yeah, in terms of the discussion about the cash flow impact of some of these emergency projects, I just wanted to point out that under tab 30 on page 17 is the Caltrans's finance report. It's on the info calendar, and there's a graph showing the cash balance of the state highway account. In addition to the reserve that Clark mentioned, we seem to be at a relatively high level cash balance wise, and a far cry from where we were maybe 14 years ago, where Clark's staff would have been pulling the cash balances every day to make sure we had enough money.
Okay, any further discussion on this item? If not, we'll move on. Item 16, discussion of the 2018 STIP fund estimate. Mitch, this is yours.
Yes, this is an informational item that was distributed as a yellow. The assumptions will be returning to the commission in May for approval. Before then, staff will reach out to the commissioners to gather their input and relay that to Caltrans. And Clark will again be presenting this item.
Thank you. So as Mitch described, this is the first of a two-part process in arriving at the fund estimate assumptions. Really what is intended in this presentation is to set the foundation for your input either today or in the ensuing weeks in terms of the assumptions that form the basis for the fund estimate. It's worth noting that ultimately these assumptions drive the capacity for programming for STIP SHOP for the period of the fund estimate, which is 5 years. The ultimate outcome will be the adoption of the fund estimate in August of this year. So there are three elements of the fund estimate assumption document, which is an attachment to the book item. The first section deals with options on major categories and major assumptions that we would present to you today. The second section is informational items that are significant in terms of revenue available for the programs. And the third are more detailed minutia that is included in the document, but we won't review today. So just a basic review of the concept or the math behind the fund estimate. We begin with our cash balances. We estimate or project the revenue that will be available. We subtract the operational costs, maintenance, and traffic operations for the department, as well as prior commitments to the programs, and then what remains is available for programming for STIP and SHOP. The most significant thing we'll talk about today is the revenue box. Those are the most significant assumptions that we act on and receive your input on. So the first of those significant revenue assumptions has to do with the price-based excise tax, which we've talked about previously. And in our proposal, we've laid out three alternatives and are recommending one of those alternatives. The first alternative uses the Department of Finance's projections. So each of these alternatives assumes the Department of Finance's projections as it relates to fuel consumption and general economic growth. The difference is the assumption about this price-based excise tax rate. So the first alternative A just takes at face value the Department of Finance's projections, which brings in roughly $16.01 billion. The alternative B uses essentially the same pattern for revenue assumptions that were used when you adopted the 2016 amended fund estimate. And that assumes that the rates will gradually increase by 2 cents each year until they reach 18 cents, and then assumes that they'll remain at 18 cents throughout the fund estimate period. Alternative C assumes a more aggressive pattern of tax increase rates. Alternative C jumps to 18 cents immediately and then tracks up to as high as 21.5 cents during the fund estimate period. We believe that Alternative B is a conservative but a reasonable approach in projecting tax increases, and that's our recommendation to the Commission. It's just worth noting, and you've lived this history, the price-based excise tax is hard to predict, it's volatile, and so we're doing our best to forecast where it's going and being conservative in making those assumptions. The other significant revenue assumption has to do with the proceeds receipts from the federal government. This is a little less volatile and much easier to predict, particularly in light of the fact that the federal government has adopted the FAST Act, which covers a portion of the fund estimate period. There are varying assumptions that could be made about the inflation factors and increases to the proceeds. We're recommending an alternative that assumes that the FAST Act distributions will occur as laid out in the Act with the inflation factors or increases that are part of the Act. That brings in roughly $19.1 billion over the fund estimate period. A much more minor assumption has to do with the motor vehicle account. State law calls for transfers from that account to the state highway account, which have not occurred for at least a decade. And we don't want to lose sight of what we hope to be an obligation of the law. And so we include a small assumption, $10 million, for the fund estimate period, really just to stake a claim, if you will, and ensure that we are reminding folks of that requirement. The informational items for you have to do with transfers of revenues to other programs that aren't allocated by the Commission. The diesel tax, sales tax revenue, 63% of that is committed to the State Transit Assistance Program, which is about $2.4 billion over the fund estimate period. State law also requires the transfer of certain transportation revenues from the state highway account to pay for debt service on transportation-related bond issuances, and that amounts to $432 million during the fund estimate period. A comment about uncertainty. We have had very few instances where we've dealt with the fund estimate process where some new law or some new imposition has not come along to disrupt our efforts. Examples might be a federal program and the new federal administration and what they may or may not do in terms of transportation funding, and it's been well documented or discussed the state revenue proposals. Those are all potentials to impact the fund estimate. As a reminder, you have the option, if the need exists, to extend the adoption date of the fund estimate up to 90 days past August 15th. That may be something that could be considered depending on the outcome of some of the things that are being considered. And finally, the next steps, we will work with your staff and receive your input on the assumptions in order to create a final recommendation to you that would be brought for adoption in May. Following that, the fund estimate draft would be brought to you in the June meeting, and in August we would be proposing your adoption of the fund estimate. That concludes my presentation. Any questions on this topic?
Do we have any questions, Commissioners? Questions from our staff? Mitch?
The one comment I would make was in relation to the price-based excise tax, it would be helpful if for the various funding or revenue estimate levels, we had what that would equate to in the price-based excise tax amount and then what that essentially equates to in gas price. Setting aside the fact that the Board of Equalization does a very complicated backward-looking adjustment, if we can kind of set that aside because we don't know what that'll be, just, what does 14 cents or price-based excise tax equal in a price per gallon? And so just so we have some framework in how the different revenue assumptions relate to what we might be seeing when we get gas every day.
So we'll work on that leading to the next meeting.
Thank you.
And not do it in Board of Equalization fashion.
Thank you.
I think the other thing, Clark, was Stephen has spoiled us with pictures, so we seem to do very well if we can have some kind of a chart or a graph and see some of these visually. It helps a bit too.
Very good.
Zero is still zero.
That's a very simple chart.
You could make a big egg or a little egg.
Madam Chair, one clarification to add to it, and I know you know this because we talked about it in Washington, D.C. On the federal side, the only assumption we can make is the revenue flow from the FAST Act. But the federal government needs an appropriation to be able to meet those commitments. And we're keeping very close eye on them making that appropriation to the Highway Trust Fund to be able to meet the obligations of the FAST Act. It's the only assumption we can make, but that's one thing that could impact even the stream of money that we think is the most consistent. But we're tracking that very closely.
Well, I mean, we heard Secretary Chow tell us that business as usual is not going to be the business that we knew before. So I think it's pretty safe assumption to think we're going to see some changes. What they're going to look like is probably anybody's discussion point. But I think that it's, there's lots of variables. So that extra time, we may need the extra time to figure out. Plus, if we have some kind of a transportation deal, I mean, that's different dollars too, right? Perhaps.
Thank you.
Okay, any further discussions? Thank you. Okay, moving along, road charge, item 17.
Good afternoon, Commissioners. I'm Curtis Vandermolen. It's a pleasure to be with you, working on the road user charge. Tab 17 is an informational item this afternoon. The pilot program will be concluding. The participants will be wrapping up and sending back their devices, and it'll be finalized at the end of this month in March. The Technical Advisory Committee will be meeting on the 21st of April, and they'll review some of the preliminary conclusions from the study, and then staff will present those conclusions and what the Technical Advisory Committee came up with at the May Commission meeting. I would like to introduce Brady Takeall to present the update from Caltrans.
Thank you, Curtis. Good afternoon, Chair Inman, Road Charge Technical Advisory Committee Chair Madaffer, and fellow CTC Commissioners. I'm Brady Takeall, Project Manager for the California Road Charge Pilot Program being administered by Caltrans on behalf of the California State Transportation Agency. Today I'm here to provide you an update on the pilot program, so I wanted to give you a quick brief update on how the numbers are looking. To date, we have, in the pilot program, have driven over 27 million miles. As Curtis had mentioned, we are entering our final and last month of the pilot. It will conclude on March 31st. And in true sports fan fashion, it's a little bit of March Madness for me. We remain over 5,000 vehicles in the pilot program. That was a TAC recommendation. We sit as of February 21st at 5,170 participating vehicles. And also noted, we have 6 different reporting methods. We'll describe those in a little bit greater detail in another slide. So let's take a look at some milestones that we've achieved since our last update to the Commission. First, we completed our mid-pilot survey. These surveys were conducted for our private vehicle participants. And so we have about 4,500 private vehicles participating in the pilot project. Over around 4,200 surveys were sent, 2,500 surveys completed, which is a completion rate of about 60%. Very good data set. That was conducted from October 10th to October 31st. We've also, in November, offered our participants the opportunity to change concepts or change account managers. And so this was an opportunity, whether they liked their method or account manager or not, or whether they just wanted to try something different, they had the opportunity to switch. And so from November 1st through November 15th, 92 vehicles took advantage of that milestone. Which is actually only 2% of the participants. So either everybody really likes the method and account manager that they've chosen, or nobody just wanted to try anything different. Next, we're heading in from the January to March timeframe. We had our final pilot survey that was sent out on January 30th and closed on March 6th. We're still tabulating all of the statistics for that, and that will be presented in a future meeting. And one thing I don't have noted up there is that this month we will be surveying our heavy commercial trucking participants. So in the pilot, we have 55 commercial trucking participants taking part. And this is actually the first time the commercial trucking industry had taken part in a pilot of this nature. And so we think that there's some valuable feedback to get from that experience. In addition, we've kicked off our first set of focus groups this week. Yesterday, we held a focus group in Irvine, California. Today, we'll be holding one in San Jose, California. Tomorrow, we'll be in Sacramento, California. And next week, we are holding one in Fresno, California, and one in San Luis Obispo. These focus groups were picked based on the concentration of participation. So we didn't want folks to have to travel too far to get to a focus group. Also, heading into the March-April timeframe, these are milestones that we have upcoming. One big milestone that we have to achieve is the pilot closeout. That's happening at the end of March, and will kind of roll over into the April timeframe. Participants have already started receiving correspondence from their account managers on the pilot closeout process, and all of the account managers have customer support in place to help with any questions that any of the participants have on how to close out the pilot. Once the pilot's closed out, it's really going to be our time to start analyzing the data, compiling the data, working with the California State Transportation Agency on the various elements that will be included in the final report. I do have a slide on it a little bit later, but we also have an independent evaluation that's taking part as part of the process. That's who's administering the surveys, that's who's administering the focus groups, and they're also interviewing the project delivery team. We have a group of state departments that were pulled together, the interagency working group. These are agencies like DMV, the Board of Equalization, State Controller's Office, folks that either have are participating currently in the gas tax and have a responsibility there, or may be impacted by a potential road charge program. CalSTA will be releasing the final report to the legislature, to the commission, and to our technical advisory committee in July of 2017. And so we know it's not a lot of time, but we know we have a lot of work to get done in a short time frame. So let's take a look at the participant overview. I'm going to start more on the left side of the pie chart, where we have 7% of the participants that are participating in the pilot are in the other category. That represents out-of-state vehicles, agency fleets, and Native Americans living on tribal land. As you move down, 1% of the pilot is the heavy commercial trucking participation. That comprises about 1% of the pilot, or 55 participants. Moving down from there, it's your yellow-colored slice of the pie. That's your light commercial vehicles, and so that represents about 5% of the project, or a little over 250 vehicles. And obviously, the largest slice of the pie there, 87% are your private participating vehicles. You will see a breakout to the right-hand side. That's just breaking out the private vehicle enrollment. We tried to isolate it by the various regions that were recommended by the TAC, and so as you can see, 46% of the 4,500 private vehicles participating reside in Northern California, 14% in the central region, and 40% in the south. A couple other stats that I have to share with you that aren't included on the slide itself is participating vehicle types. By percentage, internal combustion engine comprised 86% of the pilot private vehicle participants, and 14% actually represent hybrid and electric vehicles. Also, the top 2 participating vehicles in the pilot remain the same. It's the Toyota Prius and Ford F-150. So now we're going to take a look at the account managers. A quick reminder of the 4 different account managers that participants had to choose from in the pilot program. Starting from your left, Azuga, they are more of a technology provider. They provided reporting methods such as the plug-in OBD 2-meter device, the smartphone option, and also in-vehicle telematics, both with and without location enabled. To the right of Azuga is DriveSync by IMS. They provide a very similar suite of offerings, the plug-in device, smartphone application, and telematics as well, both with and without location enabled. And to the right of DriveSync is your California State account manager. Now, they represent your lower technology options, such as, or manual options, such as your time permit, your mileage permit, and your odometer charge or odometer reading. Now, the far right is E-Road. That was not open to private vehicle participants because E-Road is servicing primarily the heavy vehicles that are participating in the program. It's a very robust, anchored-in GPS fleet management system, and so unfortunately it would have been too cost prohibitive to offer that option to the private vehicles, nor did probably anybody want that thing anchored in their vehicle, but they've been providing support to our commercial trucking entities in the pilot program. One interesting thing that the commercial trucking got to test out is they had the ability to have E-Road report their international fuel tax agreement reporting, IFTA reporting, automatically based on their participation in the pilot, and it was absolutely free. So again, we're going to be surveying trucking, and we'll be hearing more about that experience as we move forward. I'm going to focus back on private vehicles now, and this is the breakdown of methods chosen by the various private vehicle participants. As you can see, actually 80% of the participants enrolled in the pilot are actually using a more automated mileage method. And of that 80%, 64% actually chose one that had location enabled. Inverse, the manual or low-tech options, that represented only about 20% of the private vehicle participants. And so you know, the terms privacy and data security come up a lot, but it's interesting that as how we experienced in the pilot at least, that over 80% of people decided to use technology and felt comfortable enough to even pick location-enabled options. And so we'll definitely be reporting some of those findings as we move into the final report phase. And in terms of participant feedback, participants have a vast number of ways to provide this feedback on the pilot program experience. Right now, we're concurrently doing an independent evaluation where, you know, we had mentioned earlier, there's surveys and there's focus groups and there's ample opportunities to provide feedback that way. But also all of our account managers, the pilot program itself, we all have customer support, whether it's via call center or email inquiry technicians. We have those established to intake all public comment and participant comment as well. All technical advisory committees are open to the public, and so participants are noticed through their newsletter and their communications from the project delivery team, and anybody from the general public is welcome to participate or come comment at any of the TAC meetings. We also have our state and local partners that have continuously provided feedback, whether it was brought to them from a participant or from their constituents, and we continue to work together on trying to provide as much input into the pilot program and the final report, and we really look forward to reporting that back to the commission once that information is available. In terms of the percentages that you see in front of you, I'd like to just say that all of those percentages have increased from the beginning pilot or pre-pilot survey. When participants were asked how satisfied they were with their reporting method, it actually jumped 17% from the pre-pilot survey from 73% to 90%. So it seems as though participants are enjoying the experience and for that matter, have found a method that fits their lifestyle and choice. In terms of how easy it was to participate, that slightly increased, although it wasn't bad in the beginning. It was about 84% of those that were surveyed said pilot's pretty easy to participate in terms of time and effort, and so it only increased 2% to 86. In terms of overall satisfaction with the pilot itself, that had by far probably the highest increase. It started at 64% in pre-pilot and actually increased to about 83% now, so a 20% increase in overall satisfaction. And agreeing that when asked, do you think a road charge is more fair than a gas tax, that also increased slightly by about 5% from 66 to 71%. One thing that's not on the slide is that, coming into something like this, it's new. It's something that hasn't really been experienced before. And so we try to measure that level of uncertainty coming into the project. And so uncertainty about the concept of a road charge funding system actually has decreased from inception till now. And so originally it was around 17% of participants that were sort of uncertain about this type of method of generating funding for the system. Now that's dropped to about 10%. So I think as more people are participating in the pilot, maybe their initial perceptions, may have changed just based on experiencing what it is, what it is to deal with an account manager, what it is to have, to report by mileage. And so I think just taking part in the pilot, it shows that people are feeling more comfortable about the road charge. So next is just our timeline. This is something you've seen before, but in phases 1 and 2 have been completed. Phase 1 was the TAC period where the design recommendations came out. Phase 2 was the procuring all of the vendors and setting up the system design and procuring the independent evaluation team. Phase 3 is going to close at the end of this month, and so we will be moving into that next phase 4, where we'll be working alongside our state transportation agency to develop that final report that I had mentioned earlier, with the various findings that reside in Senate Bill 1077. Also, you'll notice the very last bullet under Phase 4, the commission, you guys, will also take the road charge pilot program findings report that's published, and also formulating your own recommendations on how the project went to the legislature through your annual report. And so right now, we have an estimate of December 2017, but it very well could be released earlier, and so we'll be working with commission staff as well as the advisory committee to help support in any fashion that we can. So some of the policy perspectives that will be covered in the final report, at least the final report coming out of agency, are in front of you today. Some of them are directly out of Senate Bill 1077, and some of them have been brought to our attention either through public input or through the pilot. So starting at the top, robust data security and privacy protection measures have been developed for the pilot and are being tested and evaluated. We'll have a section on that. The pilot has also been developed to oversample rural participants, especially in that we have heard numerous times that public perception is that rural drivers may be impacted more by a road charge, and so We developed the pilot based on TAC recommendations, so oversample rural participants and really study that differential impact of a road charge between urban and rural drivers. Balancing other state policies is one of those areas where, we have an administration that has very aggressive environmental sustainability policies, but how do you balance that with a long-term need for sustainable transportation funding? And so we plan on addressing some of those elements in the report. Also, the pilot was developed to ensure that participants just reflect the diversity of the fleet currently using California roads, and that includes different vehicle types, electrics, hybrids, internal combustion engines, also commercial trucking and various fleets. Rate setting for the pilot, as it was a TAC recommendation that we set the rate to be revenue neutral. However, there are a number of factors that could impact rate setting, and a thorough analysis of those factors will be developed for the final report. In terms of income equity, we actively recruited volunteers into the pilot that represented all incomes levels in the state. This data that's being collected during the pilot will help inform future income equity discussions. And last but certainly not least, the cost of administration. I think we all can agree that the cost to administer a new transportation funding system is likely to be initially higher than the current gas tax collection process. Last time I had checked, to collect the gas tax, administrative cost is somewhere below 1%. Well, and in all fairness, they've had approximately a century to develop efficiencies in this program, and yeah, I think it'd be interesting to kind of see, when the gas tax was first implemented, what was the cost to administer it, that first year. And so, while the pilot is not collecting real money, we will identify the potential cost to administer the road charge program among the various factors that we're testing. And so what's worked on the pilot? Well, I can say right now we're in full data collection and analysis mode. I don't have a lot of actual numerical or quantitative findings, but we know that between the California State Transportation Agency, the Commission, the Advisory Committee, Caltrans, and all of our state partners, we've really worked collaboratively to accelerate the pilot program schedule. We thought that is something that's worth noting. We also believe that the diversity of the input that we received from our advisory committee has been stellar. It's not just transportation advocates, it's telecommunications, data security folks, privacy, regional transportation agencies, legislative representation, amongst others like the California Chamber of Commerce and California Trucking. That's very diverse. And so you can see cohesive branding was another element, and just, frankly, continuing the conversation is something that we think we've done a good enough job to have road charge in the minds of more and more California drivers. And so with that being said, I'd like to open it up to any questions that the commission may have.
Commissioner Dunn?
Yeah, Brady, really, thank you very much for this. With great respect, you took way too much time on stuff that a lot of us know a lot about because Mr. Medaffer has been chair of this, and so we've had this report throughout the process many, many times. I would encourage you to make it a little faster next time, and only because I have a lot of things that I wanted to ask, but now we took so much time in presentation, I can't go there without annoying my fellow commissioners because there's a full agenda. Do you see what I'm saying?
Absolutely.
So I've got my eye on you. I need to ask you some questions afterward. The one thing, and this is really an issue for all of us, is we had 5,500 drivers in this thing. And by the way, I'm a huge fan. So I think this is the single most important program to reduce VMT over anything else that the state is trying to do right now. And I want to encourage success somehow. You've got 5,500 drivers and an opportunity for some outside group somewhere to develop an echo chamber of support. If you're getting numbers like this, is that a discussion that anyone is having on how to keep these folks engaged now that the boring report writing gets done, so it doesn't just sit on a shelf. So,
Commissioner Dunn, first of all, we'll make sure that we won't be boring and we'll be exciting.
thank you.
And I do think, and in deference to Brady, we thought that it was important that we give a more comprehensive briefing to the commission today, because this was the first time we've really fully briefed the commission since we started the pilot. So, but again, your comments noted.
Yeah, we've seen this.
And as far as engaging the existing pilot participants, absolutely. We're also going to be looking to a new phase of road charge. We need to work with the administration, with the Department of Finance, and others, but we need to look at what can be another way of tracking miles that is not so administratively expensive. And so by using the people that are currently in the pilot as cheerleaders for us moving forward to helping out in that.
Yeah.
Very much an important piece of that.
Well, and it doesn't tend to be government that does that well, again, with great respect. Is there an outside support group that exists today in the private sector, nonprofit or something, that can help viral some of the good news of this to prepare our public for eventually sometime down the road a change in the system?
I think Brady can address, they've got a couple of public outreach efforts that are getting ready to launch. That I believe are going through some glitches as well, but I don't know if you want to comment on that.
Sure. So
The short answer is yes.
Okay, that's all I need. Thank you, Brady. We can't,
Absolutely.
I'm worried because we just can't take any more time.
Well, I can
I'll
talk
chat
to you
with
after the meeting if you'd like, and address any questions that you have.
Very good, thank you.
So we'll collectively gather all of our questions and ask them on a sidebar, but thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
So with that, we're going to move on to item number 18, the report on the unfunded transportation investment priorities. And for those of you that were out picking up materials earlier, I think these arrived a little bit late, so there might be a handout back there if you didn't get it.
That's correct. Thank you, commissioners, and don't worry, Commissioner Dunn, I'll do this really quickly so we can.
No, you can take forever.
I'm sure there's really not much to talk about, other than I want to echo Executive Director Branson's comments on this report and how much the regions contributed to, helped make this happen. I have to tell you, I was personally really amazed and impressed at the way that they responded so quickly and so well to our request for help on this report. I felt like when we started really into this at the end of January, we set a very ambitious timeline, knowing that we had to try to get something to the legislature in time for April. And when we mentioned the short turnaround we'd need for their input, they didn't blink an eye. They said, "Thank you very much. We'd love to help. We'll do what we can." And I was really, really impressed. And I just wanted to, again, comment on that. I think that our partnership, the Commission's partnership with our regional partners and the other stakeholders in the transportation sector, is very strong. And I just have to say we are very appreciative of that. So that being said, this is an action item. Tab 18, this is related to a report on unfunded transportation investment priorities, or what I like to call the RUTIP. We have to have acronyms for everything, don't we? So I thought that would be a great one. Better than the FACANA, or the formerly known as needs assessment. So I thought we'd go with that. Excuse me. So staff is asking the commission permission to transmit this report to the legislature as it is essentially finished in this book item, with the delegation of authority to commission staff to make any necessary non-substantive changes prior to the submittal, given that we still need to have it laid out in an appropriate manner. We're working with Caltrans to help us do that, and so we just couldn't have it ready in time for this meeting, but it would be substantially the same report. It'll just look prettier, and that will be the request. This report really is aimed at accomplishing two goals. First, we want to describe the state's transportation system and its needs in a general way, as well as why transportation is important to everyone in California. I think that there's been a lot of discussion about transportation needs for a long time, particularly amongst those of us who are familiar with transportation, with the understanding that, of course, transportation is important. I mean, we all know this very well. I think that there are people out there, legislators in particular, who haven't had it explained to them well why transportation is important. There are, of course, many legislators who already know this and take it for granted, but there are some who don't understand really the ramifications of a failing transportation system to every Californian's quality of life and, you know, the state's overall economy. So first, we wanted to talk about that, and then second, we really wanted to give the regions of the state the opportunity to highlight their priorities and their needs, and really talk about, from their perspective, what they would do if they were given the opportunity with additional resources to address some of their concerns. And as you'd find in this report, you know, the various regions really capture various priorities. To some regions, the maintenance of their existing system is critical. If they don't get another dollar, you know, the system will shut down on them. In other regions, well, all regions commented on the need for additional maintenance of both the state highway system and local roads. You know, in other regions, transit capital is and maintenance is critical to them, because they have systems that are falling apart, that they've built their entire, you know, forward-thinking transportation plans around their transit systems working well, and when they're not up to speed, or they're constantly, you know, unfortunately getting more and more delayed, they're having more trouble attracting the ridership necessary to meet their greenhouse gas emission reduction goals that the state has set for them and others, and other types of targets. So we wanted to give them the opportunity to give their perspective, and that's what the second half, or really 3/4 of the report is the regions, each of the regions laying out their priorities, their needs, and trying to communicate to their legislators, their direct legislators, this is why this is important to us. And here are some examples of things that we could get done if we had more resources. And we hope, staff hopes, that with this report to the legislature, it will help those legislators who are really on the margins, you know, trying hard to support a transportation funding proposal, but having trouble back in their districts, have some more to say about why they do support it ultimately when they do vote for it before April 6th, as we all hope they do. And with that, that's really what the report's about. I'm happy to answer questions if you have any questions about the specific report, or take suggestions, of course, before we transmit it. But I hope that at the end, we all agree that this is a great idea, and we can do so. So let me know what you have.
Commissioner Gometti?
Thank you, Chair. I would guarantee you, I don't think, maybe I'm cynical, but this is 83 pages. I don't know one legislator who's going to read this thing. So how are we going to break this thing down and disseminate this so that they really understand what's going on? We can't do it as a commission. I mean, we compile the report with input from all the regions, et cetera. So how do the regions, how do we get our point across?
That's a great question, Commissioner. And to that end, one of the things that we're doing is we will have a transmittal letter to each of the legislators when we send this report to them. And in that letter, we will identify the specific super region or regions that they represent, so that they don't have to flip past, you know, for example, North State. If they live in Southern California, they'll know that the Southern California super region starts on whichever page it happens to start on when we finally get it all laid out. And we will be contacting staff directly. We hope that our partners will do the same. We want this to be a tool for all of the regions to use when they talk to their delegation. It is certainly not it can't be a commission-only report, because frankly, the regions did so much to make this report a reality.
So we have lots of partners sitting in the audience. How many of our partners out there are going to take this report and go meet with their assembly person or state senator? Look at all those hands go up. There's one. See, this is the problem. We're not getting, we do all this heavy lifting in this report, which is very valuable, but we're not out there doing the footwork, the ground truthing with the state legislature, and they have no clue. They're going to get this report. Their staff's going to get it. I'll guarantee you they won't know what's in it. You know, we have to do a better job of our partners going out there lobbying the Assembly and lobbying the senators, or we're never going to get the funding that we need.
Yes, sir, I agree. Which is good
Commissioner
for
Dunn?
my career.
Commissioner Gilmedi, I will share with you, at least to Senator Bell's credit, when Orange County business leaders showed up for a meeting, about 50 of us showed up, and he was presenting on SB1, he handed to every one of them a copy of a list of every city and the county. And this is the funding from his proposal that would benefit to convince those business leaders to support. So it's a very good point, and it's very powerful. And at least one leader is getting how to do that.
I'm not worried about the business leaders. When a business leader understands what's in it and what's needed.
Yeah, they do it, but here's the legislators
We got to
who
get
did
the
it.
guys who vote on this to
Absolutely.
understand it.
Well, that was Senator Bell.
Any other comments? The other suggestion, Eric, I think, as Commissioner Dunn reminds us to kind of boil this back to something very simple. I mean, when I look at the San Francisco 13,700 hours of delay average, I mean, I think to take that into some crisp soundbite equation that everybody can relate to is very, very powerful, because to me, I mean, that's a tragedy that you have all these different corridors with thousands of hours of delay in all of our regions. So I think that while you need the details to help personalize it, I think you also need to get some really good sound bites, because we all know that it's about 40 characters now. That's our maximum. Yeah. Executive Director Branson.
Yes, Commissioners, I just wanted to add that as staff, we will, we'll move forward with your blessing to get this document publicized. But our work doesn't end there. We will begin continuing to work with the regional agencies and others on how best to transmit this report. And, participants on this report and developing it, not only did we have technical staff, we had representatives from the regional agencies with a legislative background, and we need to seek out and work with the regions on communications and how to best transmit this report out so it is well received. And we will also be working with you in that regard. And we know we need to do it very quickly, so this will be in the next week. Yes, so we need to do it right. There's a lot of work here, and we need to make sure it's communicated out to get the greatest level of attention that we can.
So this requires an action?
One final comment, because this is still bugging me. I don't know why, we have a regional agencies meeting, we have a rural task force meeting, we have a self-help task force meeting. Why don't you guys get organized and divvy up the Assembly, divvy up the Senate, and go visit these people? We need your help, and you need to help yourselves. So please put that on your agenda. Thank you.
Okay, so we're looking for a motion. Okay.
I just wanted to make a comment.
Oh, Sarkis is going to give us a one-pager.
So I hear you, and I just wanted to let you know that some of us have already done that. Speaking for the Central Coast Coalition, we actually had our state legislative day last week. So we met with all 7 assembly and senators that represent our region, and we actually let them know that your needs assessment report is coming out. So we highlighted projects from our region. I think some of the other regions probably already done that, so it's probably just a matter of us reporting back to you, but we are listening, we're heeding the call, and we've met with them. Thanks.
And Mayor coming forward.
Good afternoon, Commissioners. I couldn't resist Commissioner Gometti. Ann Mayer, Executive Director of the Riverside County Transportation Commission, member of the Board of Directors of the Self-Help County Coalition, as well as a board member of Mobility 21. Commissioners, I assure you that agencies like ours are doing everything we can to communicate the needs to our delegation members and then beyond to the Assembly Transportation Committee members, as well as the Senate Transportation Committee members. Frankly, this is almost all we've been spending our time doing. Mobility 21, for example, goes up within the next 2 weeks for our round of meetings in the Capitol, as well as a legislative reception. Frankly, Mr. Gometti, it's falling on deaf ears. We have been talking about a shortage of funding for years. For the self-help counties in many areas of the state, over 70% of our project funding is coming from local sales tax measures. We are at a point where we can no longer leverage those dollars because there's no other matching fund. So I assure you that around the state, in every region, we are reaching out to our delegation members and doing everything we can. This is a really sensitive political issue, and it's very difficult to get movement on it. So we have been doing it. We will continue. We are not giving up. Some of our boards are taking very difficult public positions on these bills at great risk to themselves from an elected official standpoint. So I assure you, sir, that we are doing everything we can to push
And
it
now that
forward.
you have this, you can divide this up by Assembly District and Senate District. You know, this is just out, right? So, I mean, I would take the pieces that you need, and anyone should take the pieces they need and show them what they're going to lose. I mean, I don't know how else to put it more straightforward than that.
And we can do that, and we've told them what they're going to lose. And so it's very hard to find a compelling argument that will have some of our elected officials make some really tough votes. So we'll keep trying. Thank you.
Okay, any other? I think we have a motion on the floor and a second. So, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Anybody abstaining? No?
Here's the motion.
There was.
Yes,
Commissioner
done.
Dunn
I'm sorry.
seconded
I should have called it out. So it was Medaffer and Dunn. So I think we're good. So motion carries.
Thank you, Commissioners.
So I think it's about past our time. Quick bio break. But before we do, I want to recognize one of our former CTC commissioners, Dana Reed, who is a good friend to all and still intimately involved in helping us with our transportation issue as he serves as vice chair of the RCTC and also the CBAG, I guess, and City Council in Indian Wells. So Dana, good to see you. Thank you. With that, we're going to take a 10-minute break, then we're back to work.